Pearl Harbor. In early 2006, I was looking through some pictures when I came across some of my old Navy pictures. Those pictures and the memories of them inspired this story. Anticipating the upcoming anniversary of December 7, I thought about where I was on that date, for it surely had a huge effect on my life. I didn't know just how much at the time. On Thanksgiving, I was talking to son-in-law Chuck, and I asked him if he remembered where he was during that date, on that date. He looked at me kind of funny and said, "No, I wasn't even born." And it dawned on me I should have known better than to ask him that, because his wife Connie is the same age as he is. It made me stop and think about how much older I am than the people I see and talk to every day. I truly believe that being around all my kids and grandkids is why I have lived such a ripe old age. They make me feel younger than I really am. As I think about it, I really haven't been around or associated with very many people my own age since we were in the station. Of course, we had customers come into the store who are our age, but we didn't see them socially or otherwise as we worked such long hours, 7 days a week in the store. When I'm with Ed, Rob, or Chuck, or either of their spouses, they treat us as equals and friends instead of old folks. It makes my heart sing when I think about how lucky Belda and I are to have kids who treat us with so much love and understanding. Another thing, when I look at my great-grandkids, it's hard to realize just how many years there is between us. Now to get on where I was on December the 7th. It's called A Time to Remember. A while back I read where someone asked, "What were you doing when you heard about Pearl Harbor?" I was 17 and a junior in high school, and my memory tells me the following. It was about noon. I and a friend were with my father and an uncle who went to see a man across town on business. There was a sandstorm the night before, and the air was still full of dust, and the wind was still blowing. You could not see more than a block or two. My friend and I stayed in the car while my dad and uncle went inside. When they came out, the man they came to see asked my dad, "Did you hear about Pearl Harbor?" And my dad said, "No, what's that?" The man said it was a harbor in Hawaii, and the Japanese had attacked it with airplanes and sunk some of our ships. My uncle replied, "Well, we're probably going to go to war now." It didn't register with me too much until the very next day in school. The principal called an assembly, and we all listened to President Franklin D. Roosevelt declare a state of war on the Empire of Japan. It was a broadcast I will never forget. After thinking about that, it brought to mind where I was doing when I heard that the Japanese had surrendered and the war was over. I was stationed in the Philippines in Subic Bay in the island of Luzon at a naval supply depot. As I remember, it was in the evening, about 10 o'clock, and I and a buddy were riding in the back of a big dump truck with whom we had hitched a ride. We were on an overnight pass and were going to a nearby town for some R&R. The driver had his radio on and yelled back to us, "The Japs have surrendered." Oh, there was a lot of hugging and yelling in the back of that truck. Both of us had been overseas over 2 years and were ready to go home. Of course, it was several months before we were able to come home and come stateside and go home. Now that I'm on the subject, maybe you might like to hear how I made my departure from the Philippines. Since you are not here, I will take that as a yes answer. First, I should tell you about my work and its effect on my leaving. I was a storekeeper on the docks in Olongapu in Subic Bay at the north end. I was a senior checker with the most time on the docks, so I was shift leader. I would gather my crew and drive 25 miles to the docks or pier where I would assign a man to each hold of the ship. When the boom loaded cargo on trucks on the dock, my checker would give the truck driver a route slip as to where the load was to go. We had a manifest of the ship's cargo and its destination. As the war was over, most of the supplies were sent to our area and piled in an open plot that had been graded off for them. They were left in the sun and rain because they were no longer needed. I saw several loads of surgical instruments and medical supplies lying in the sun, lying in the rain, ruined. Well, back to my story. This was on a Saturday night, and we got off at midnight. At about 9 o'clock, I checked all the men, and all was okay, so I decided to go take a nap. Yes. I and a buddy went down to the end of the dock to an old shack that was unused. We had previously put some medical stretchers up in the attic. They made great beds, and we crawled up and went to sleep. This was not a first for me or him. We must have been tired or was in need of a lot of sleep, because when we came out of that shack, we were startled at what we saw. The dock was totally empty, no one was there, and it was pitch dark. Even the ship's lights were out, and it was dark. Since the war ended, the docks closed down from Saturday midnight to Monday morning. We had slept past 1 o'clock. Here we were, two guys standing on a pitch-black dock all alone, 25 miles from our base, with no transportation, no phone, or anything. Well, we knew there was a naval receiving station about 4 miles away that had a mess hall that was open 24 hours. We had stopped there several times to eat or for get snacks and coffee. Hoping we could find someone going our way, we struck out for that mess hall. We arrived at the mess hall around 3 a.m. and started asking around if anyone was going to our area. After about an hour or so, we found a trucker who was loading supplies for a trip down the coast, passing right by our base. He offered us a ride if we would help him load his truck. We helped him load, and then he said he had to eat before we got on the road. We joined him in the mess hall for a fine breakfast. This mess hall was the best food of my entire Navy career, except for the Treasure Island near San Francisco. By the time we got started, it was daylight around 7 a.m. Up to this point, we knew we were in no trouble because Sunday was a day off. It took a little over an hour to get down the coast to our base, where the driver let us off, and we had to walk the last 3/4 of a mile to our area near the edge of the jungle. My buddy went to his tent and I went to mine. I lived with 3 other sailors. We all had different jobs. Johnny Molesky was a ship fitter and a welder. George Bepko was a yeoman in the payroll disbursement. And Ted Kwiatkowski was a storekeeper in the ship's store. When I entered the tent, Molesky said, "Where the hell you been? You and Bepko are on a stateside draft that shoves off at 10 a.m. down at the beach tower." Well, it was now past 9 a.m. and I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to do next. Molesky said, "What do you want packed? I'll help you." We threw a few things in a small ditty bag, shook hands with them 2 guys, told them they could have any of my other stuff they wanted, and I ran the whole mile to the beach tower and got there just as they were reading the list of people on the draft. George Bepko said, "I didn't think you were coming, man." There was no docks at our base, just a half-mile-long sandy beach. All incoming and outgoing cargo from our Naval Supply Depot was on boats and crafts with flat bottoms and front ramps so they could get up on the beach. The craft we drew for our trip was amphibious for carrying troops on land and sea. It was to take us down to the far end of the bay at a submarine base. It was almost a 2-hour ride, and we were due there by 1 p.m. We loaded up, got underway. There was 12 men on the draft, all with enough points to get stateside. points accumulated for time overseas and areas served in. You had to have 30 points to go home. I had just enough. We were out of the bay about 20 minutes or so, and just around the bend from the beach tower. Now, the beach tower was about a 12 by 12 building that was 3 stories high, and that's where they had the lamps that they signaled with and binoculars so they could check the ships berthed in the bay. So anyway, we were around from the beach tower when the motor quit. Try as he might, the boat coxswain could not get the dang thing started. In my entire life, I don't believe I ever felt so scared and left out. I had been overseas for over 2 years and 4 months, and I wanted to go home. Of course, the other 11 men on the draft felt the same way. We had no way to signal to shore as they were out of sight. We were at the mercy of the tide to get us to shore. I just don't know how long we drifted, but after a long, depressing time, an LCM, Landing Craft Mechanized, came by on his way up from the sub-base. He asked us our problems and offered a tow. He dropped us off at the beach tower. When we arrived there, we found there was no other boat available. Well, what the heck are we going to do now? Well, a friend of mine in Bepco's, Bill Kidwell, came over and asked us what was wrong. Upon hearing our problem, he went to the coxswain of the LCM and asked him if he would take us to our ship. He said no, for he'd get into trouble. Well, Kidwell was our savior. He said, "What if we give you some money?" The coxswain said, "How much?" Kidwell got up all his money, and we put up all we had, all of us on the draft, and Kidwell passed the hat to the people working on the beach. Being the beach master for that shift, he was able to put a little pressure on them. When they counted the money, there was over $150. The coxswain was ready to take us. All this was taking precious time that we didn't have. We loaded onto the LCM. It was one of those with the high ramp for loading and unloading mechanized on tanks and trucks and stuff on the beaches. The coxswain was running at full bore, full RPM, for our time was running out. When we were a little over halfway down the bay, we spotted a ship coming from the base heading towards the mouth of the bay, going out to sea. Someone yelled, "That's our ship! We missed it!" Well, panic and tears set in again. Fortunately for us, there was a second-class signalman on the draft. He took 2 white hats, climbed up on the top of that ramp, and started signaling that ship. For a long time, it looked like they were not going to see us. And then suddenly the ship stopped. All this time, the coxswain was heading for the ship full bore. We then got a flashing signal from the ship for us to come aboard. With cries and yells, we made it to the ship and got on board. We sailed out of Subic Bay, and 5 hours later we docked in Manila, where we stayed for the next 10 days, loading people on to go stateside. Needless to say, we could have caught and boarded that dang ship any time during those 10 days. All the panic and tears seemed for nothing. In conclusion of this episode of my Navy Overseas, I thought about our first overnight liberty from Treasure Island near San Francisco in the Oakland-San Francisco Bay. The island is located near the center and under the Bay Bridge. It is a good-sized island, and at that time was a receiving station for the thousands of Navy personnel coming from the Pacific Theater of War. We got 3 of those overnight liberties while they were processing our papers and payroll. This took 6 or 7 days before we could go home on leave. I was very impatient to get on the road. I had 30 days leave coming. 6 days later, I went home to Grand Junction, Colorado. Now I show you this first picture is my boot camp picture, And the next picture was taken several days after I was discharged from the Navy. That's it. Can I say something else? And I want to thank the cameraman and his crew. Thank you very much.